The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
This weekend is the final push to voting day for all the federal parties. What should they focus on to get your vote? Erin Kelly joins us with Polly's answer to that and on what the AI pollster sees unfolding come Monday. Also, our Ontario Hubs explain some efforts to improve transit in the post-COVID era. And from housing to climate change, we've got the Agenda's Week in Review, Federal Election Edition. It's Friday, September 17th, and that's all ahead on the agenda. What has felt like a pretty short campaign is already almost over. Monday is Election Day, even as advanced polls had been underway for a while. With us for what might unfold then in the nation's capital, Erin Kelly, CEO of Advanced Symbolics, Inc., and keeper of the artificial intelligence pollster known as Polly. Welcome back, Erin.
Hey, Sam.
So I guess officially 2 days left. The election is on Monday. Has Polly picked a winner?
Yes, absolutely. As of this morning, Polly is calling for a Liberal government.
Why is that?
Well, there are a lot of issues. We've really started to see the Liberals trending upward all week. It started with the protesters at the hospitals. That is still today the biggest issue, especially in Ontario. But we also see, so if I were to say it's the issue of the protesters, the vaccine passports, this idea that there are two camps here. There are the people who feel that getting vaccinated is a civic duty and the people who believe they have the right not to be vaccinated. And the Conservatives are seen to be on the wrong side of that issue for the majority of Canadians.
Well, Trudeau has said that part of the reason why he called an election during a pandemic was because he was governing with a minority government. So what you see for Monday, is this a minority or majority government?
Well, right now, and it's still very much in flux, the momentum is for the Liberals. It's about a 60-40 split. So we're seeing a 62% chance today that it'll be a minority government and a 37% chance that it'll be majority, but that could change easily by Monday, and we could be looking at a majority Liberal government.
Erin, is there anything that the Conservative Party can do in the next few days to turn that around?
I think it'll be really difficult. So the big problem for Erin O'Toole yesterday, as I mentioned, there's the protesters, him not taking a strong enough stand there. I give the assist to Jason Kenney for sure. So yesterday would have been the opportunity when Mr. O'Toole was asked several times. He has been very public about the fact that he thought Jason Kenney had a good strategy for dealing with the pandemic. Now, he said that several months ago before vaccination was in full swing. But he was asked yesterday, does he still believe that Jason Kenney has a good strategy? And he refused to walk that back. And so people saw, okay, if we vote for the Conservatives, we are going to be in the same position as Alberta, possibly with a fifth wave. And so I think it'll be hard for him to walk that back now. I mean, he was able to walk back gun control, but that's because people didn't really care that much about gun control. It wasn't a big issue coming into the election, but the pandemic and healthcare and people's lives, that is a big issue. And I think it's hard to walk that back when you refuse to do that all day yesterday.
I guess the timing, as we know, is everything in an election. Do you think things would have been different if that news in Alberta had broken, say, next week?
Well, if it had broken next week, yes. I think we would have been looking at a much tighter race at this point had it broken next week. And I think they tried to do that. I think Jason Kenney resisted coming out and bringing in these measures for as long as he possibly could. But I think the feedback from the hospital community was that he had to do something before this weekend because they could be running out of bed. So it's really interesting that it's in the end not anything the Liberals said that are causing the election to tip in their favor, but very much a Conservative play.
Do you see a scenario where the NDP ends up holding the balance of power?
We did earlier in the week, and Polly actually did calculate that there could be about a 10% chance that the Liberals would get fewer seats than the Conservatives, but if they teamed up with the NDP would have enough to prop them up and give them control of the House of Commons. So that's a much lower chance now, seeing that the Liberals are likely going to be able to do it on their own.
The People's Party has seen its support go up in this election. Will that translate into seats?
It's not, we don't see the seat efficiency for the PPC. So they're definitely going up and they're trending, but it's spread out, and it is having the effect in some cases of taking votes away from the Conservatives. We don't see that translating into seats for the People's Party.
What about the Greens? How many seats do you see them getting?
The Greens, the Greens are still sitting between 0 and 2, 3. They haven't been able to get their campaign off the ground. And I think the challenge for them is that it is a tight race and people are putting their votes into the leading parties. We are seeing, though, a nice surge for the NDP in the prairies, in the West, where they hadn't been doing well before this week.
That's surprising. Why is that?
This is right down to the Jason Kenney issue. Exactly, the Jason Kenney. Like, this literally happened in the last 48 hours. We saw ridings from the prairies, Alberta, BC, that had been Conservative switch to NDP, or in some cases Liberal.
There was a lot of criticism for the Liberals for calling this election in the first place. We are in a global pandemic. A lot of people have a lot of issues that they're juggling right now. Has that translated into voter apathy?
Yes, it definitely has. So we are seeing that engagement on this election at this point in the election, so a couple of days before voting day, is down about 25% in this election when compared to 2019. So, and often that does translate into lower turnout at the polls, unfortunately.
Advanced polls closed on Monday, but there's been reports that voter turnout for advanced polls has been up. Can you make a correlation between apathy and voter turnout?
We can often make a correlation between apathy and voter turnout. I think the reason the advanced polls are up are just because that is the group that doesn't want to show up at a polling station during a pandemic. But we do think that because engagement in the election was online, the conversation was down, that we will see, it will be interesting to see, but typically in the past, when we've seen engagement go down, we also see voter turnout go down.
There's been a lot of protests this past week, and even just since the election was called, and protesters in front of hospitals and also on Trudeau's campaign. Has that served to energize the electorate at all?
I don't know that it's energized the electorate, because we aren't seeing engagement go up, but we definitely have seen it focus this campaign. This was a campaign that had no focus in the beginning. It was, we're having an election because the Prime Minister says we need one, but we weren't sure what the issue was. So that allowed the events of the actions of the protesters to really take center stage and make this election about vaccination, freedom to not get vaccinated versus civic duty to get vaccinated. It was actually the protesters that defined this campaign. I think the Conservatives tried to make it about cost of living and the economy, and that did get attention for a while, but it kept coming back increasingly as we got closer to Election Day about vaccination, libertarianism, and that became the focus of the campaign.
There's been reports that the protesters, I think the Toronto Star was reporting that 20% of the protesters support the PPC party. And this week, I think this Friday, one of the papers has a mock-up of Maxime Bernier with a crown, and Trudeau is sitting in a chair, and I guess he's literally crowning him. I guess the implication is that if people do vote for the People's Party, that they're essentially keeping Trudeau in the seat. How do you see that translating to people who would maybe vote for the Conservatives?
Well, to be honest, I mean, as much as Maxime Bernier has gotten a lot of attention, I think the Conservatives have to take quite a bit of blame for their own fall here, because we are really seeing that the momentum really turned when Erin O'Toole refused to walk back his comments on Jason Kenney and refused to take a stronger stand with some of these protesters. I mean, when he's asked several times, what do you believe in? He wants to say, well, I believe in vaccination, but I also think that contact tracing and getting tested is good enough. And we're seeing in Alberta that that's not working so well. So I think it's a combination of things. Really, what has benefited the Liberals is that they've been unequivocal on this issue. They want people to get vaccinated. They are putting in programs to incent people to get vaccinated. They're not kind of spreading out, well, let's do testing, let's do this. They believe that vaccination is the way to go. And the Conservatives have not been clear enough on that is their policy. And I think that's really what we're seeing, is that's really what's bringing down the Conservatives. The hardcore, yes, they are going to Maxime Bernier. These are folks that, you know, they don't like the back and forth from Erin O'Toole. So he is losing about probably 5% of his support to that. But he still could have won a minority government by being more pro-vaccine than he was.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the issues. You know, for a lot of younger voters, university canvassing has played a big role in voter turnout for them. Obviously, because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to do that. Were the parties talking about issues that resonated for Generation Z, the 18 to 25-year-olds in this election?
Yeah, that's a really good point. We saw the lowest engagement for this campaign has been in the group that's 18 to 25. And when we looked at the issues that were important to them, what were they talking about? Their issues were, they were really interested in diversity, race issues, climate, and less so, they were interested in pharmacare, interestingly enough. Not interested in pharmacare. These were issues that were older people. So daycare, cost of living, housing, really appealed to that 35 to 55 group. And the younger group, the younger group was also really interested in mental health issues. And while the Conservatives raised that, it didn't really become a campaign issue. So the issues that were important to young people did not get the attention in the campaign that would have been required to get them engaged. And we definitely think that there will be a lower turnout in that group.
You know, every vote counts, and I guess for that age group, you kind of want to get them into the fold early. Can Pauly get a sense of why the parties kind of shied away from talking about those issues during this election?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think the Conservatives typically aim for an older age group. So, and we see that. We see that in our data, that the older you are, the more likely you are to vote Conservative. So the Conservatives probably wanted to keep it on the economy and cost of living and things that appeal to their base. It's hard for me to understand why the NDP and the Liberals did not try to go after that youth vote more. I mean, Justin Trudeau certainly did that the first time he ran in 2015. And it seemed to me that is a great segment for Jagmeet Singh to latch onto, especially because they are really interested in issues of race and racism and diversity. And he was the candidate best able to talk to that credibly. But he didn't make that the focus of his campaign. And I think that's a real miss. And I think something that that the party should really think about in the next election.
We've been hearing a lot of conversations about the debates, the formats, and maybe not them being able to offer the information that the public needs to know to make an informed vote. Are there any other issues that Pauly picked up that were ignored during this election that are important for the public?
There were a lot of issues. Like when you look at what the focus of the campaign, very short-term issues. Well, hopefully the pandemic is, short-term perhaps. What we didn't see in this campaign were the things that will affect Canada long-term: the national debt, the economy. We did get some dialogue on inflation, but no real kind of policies. And these are and systemic racism, climate change. These are things that will affect Canada in the long term. Protesters, Jason Kenney. Presumably these are short-term things, but they're having an outsized influence in how people vote in this election.
Was there anything that the media focused on that maybe we spent too much time?
Well, I think the media focuses on the things that are current and have broken in the last 24 to 48 hours. And that's obviously been, the PPC and the protesters have done a great job keeping the focus of this on them. And that's because every day is a new issue there. And so that's what the media tends to focus on, things that are new. Things that are longer term, it's harder to find an angle to keep people's interest. And so I think it really was up to the parties to give us something interesting to talk about vis-a-vis cost of living. I mean, the proposals that were out there, the media did focus on them. Let's look at the loans that the government is giving for affordable housing, and they showed that it really actually wasn't helping to make houses affordable. So the parties have to give the media and the public something to think about. And too often their platforms are too vague and they're vague. And so it's hard to get dialogue going on a vague promise.
This summer, there was so much news happening, but one of the most heartbreaking things that happened in this country is the discovery of the unmarked graves of Indigenous children at former residential schools. We haven't really been hearing too much about that during this election cycle. To what extent did that still resonate with people? Do people want to hear more about that during this election?
Yeah, they do. We definitely saw race, and I put the murdered Indigenous children in that racism category. Racism was always consistently in the top 10 when we looked at issues that people were discussing in this election. And it astounds me that really, when Erin O'Toole was asked by a reporter at one point in the campaign, why is racism not even in your platform? I mean, you have subsidies for buying puppies from the pound, and you have gun control, which was never even close to being in the top 20 in your platform, but you don't have anything about racism. And he just kind of said, well, racism, it's an issue for me, it's important. The problem that we saw is the minute that came up, and a lot of Canadians were really interested in that, but we saw probably from the Conservative camp, people reminding people of brown face, et cetera. So because the Liberals don't have a great history on this, they weren't able to take up that discussion. I think they were afraid, they stayed away from it. And I don't know why the NDP didn't do more with that, because their base in particular was really interested in that topic. And I think that was the saddest part of this campaign for me, that was not addressed.
That's really surprising to hear that this was important to the public, because you would think that maybe they're shying away from it because they know that the public doesn't really want to talk about it. So why the disconnect? If this is important to the public, we're in an election, why the disconnect between the politicians? I totally get your point with Trudeau, but what about the other parties?
Well, it's, that is the big question. And a lot of Canadians are asking that. Why did the Conservatives not put this in their platform? Why are the Conservatives shying away from this? I don't know that Erin O'Toole has a history. Now, maybe they do. Maybe there is a reason. And when you don't have it in your platform, it invites people to come up with their own answers. And it led people to think, well, this was one of the things, like there's always this underlying fear in the population that the Conservatives are socially conservative. And that was the reason why they didn't put it in their platform, because it didn't matter to them as a party. And Erin O'Toole never did really address that. So he leaves it to the population to discuss it amongst themselves on social media, which they definitely did do. And for the NDP, I really don't know. I mean, I think that's a good question for Jagmeet Singh. Why has he not made this more of an issue? He, of all people, and certainly in the last election, he talked about his own experience as a racialized Canadian, being a victim of systemic racism. And people we saw really, really resonated with his personal story there. Anna May Paul, well, she did talk a lot about that at the debate. And she got actually the most engagement at various points in the debate when she talked about those things. So if my message to the party leaders is, this is an issue Canadians care about, so make sure it's in your next platform and make sure it's, whoever wins government, this is an issue that people want to see addressed.
In our final few minutes here, I want to switch to the candidates themselves. Does Polly have anything to say about what people think of the candidates?
Of the leadership candidates?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, Jagmeet Singh is the most popular. So, and now, unfortunately, he's not going to, that's not going to translate into huge gains that we can see for the NDP. In terms of, for the two leading candidates, I'd say Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau, we're seeing a lot of erosion of trust. This is, I think, a concerning issue. As we go forward, if the population doesn't trust their leaders, then it's hard for the leaders to get people to buy into their policies, to their programs. And so I think this is something we have to really pay attention to as we go forward. People are feeling less engaged, less trustful, and we really saw that as the campaign progressed, trust got eroded more and more.
And I guess that's the opposite of what an election should be. 2 days left. What should the parties focus on with just 2 days left?
Well, I think Erin O'Toole has to focus on damage control. I mean, he needs like an Oscar-winning script this weekend about what his policy is for dealing with the pandemic. How will he protect the hospitals both from protesters and from sick people? How are we going to keep ICU levels down? So he needs a really good story on that over the next 2 days. And for Justin Trudeau, I think really the momentum is on his side now. And so his message of Mr. O'Toole can't even get his own candidates vaccinated, he's going to stick to that short-term script. It's not 2 days before the election is not the time to bring up new platforms or new issues, especially for the party that's in the lead.
Erin, thank you so much for your insights. And you will be back next week on Tuesday with Steve to talk about the results of the election. We really do appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nam.
Transit ridership took a substantial hit during the pandemic. As we look towards something like a new normal, advocates see room for improvement. Justin Chandler covers the Hamilton-Niagara region for Ontario Hubs, and he joins us from the Hammer with more. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Jan.
All right, so as we mentioned, municipalities across this province have seen a pretty big hit to their ridership. What have been the consequences of that loss?
Well, it's been a large financial consequence, actually. So a good example is the Hamilton Street Railway. The transit system here in Hamilton had a 46% decrease in ridership in 2020, and that ended up translating into something like a $24 million loss.
Very, very substantial. Now, you were looking at a recent study that was covered Toronto and our neighbors to the west in Vancouver that revealed some insights into how rider use during this pandemic has gone on. What have you found?
Yes, this was a study by the University of Toronto Transit Research Institute, and let me read you some of these numbers. So they found 32% of respondents said they would ride transit less following the pandemic, while 56% said they wouldn't ride less, and 12% were unsure. It also found 58% of respondents agreed the pandemic made owning a car more appealing. 26% responded to say that they'd looked into buying one. And among all the people surveyed, there was a 14% increase in vehicle ownership between May 2020 and March 2021.
Very interesting numbers. Was there anything from those numbers that were quite surprising to the experts that you spoke to and the advocates you spoke to?
Yeah, so Matthew Palm, he was one of the researchers who helped report on those findings. He was telling me that it might be a little bit overstated how many people have turned to car ownership. There is some worry among experts and people in the transit community that there's going to be lost riders because people will have sunk money into buying vehicles and they won't go back to transit. He was saying, though, that based on a deeper dive and some preliminary research and some other things he's read, he was thinking maybe some of those people that we're seeing who left transit are people who would have just bought vehicles anyway. So it's a little tough to say, but it does seem like there are people who ended up getting vehicles because of COVID-19, or at least say that they did.
So I know for your article, you spoke to some advocates and experts about how transit can be improved. Tell me what they had to say.
So there's a few different things that people are asking for and saying that would make transit better. So accessibility is one of those, trying to make transit something that people of all abilities can use. Another one is electrification, or perhaps changing fuel types to rely on greenhouse gases less. But one of the biggest things that I keep hearing about is transit-oriented communities. So this is an idea of building neighborhoods. So it relies on land use and urban planning and transit all together. But it's an idea of creating communities where people have everything they need near transit lines and where they don't have to get around a lot. They're sometimes also called 15-minute communities, just in the idea that you could get everything that you need within 15 minutes of where you live.
All right, so I want to talk funding for a minute, and you and I don't have to look far from, the city of Hamilton that recently greenlit the LRT there. But with funding, does it help when governments direct funds for a particular use, or is it better to sort of give a blanket funding to these communities?
It kind of depends on who you ask. So a lot of the experts I spoke to and the advocates said that yes, it does help because the federal government or the provincial government has more money than the cities, and they can actually go and give some direction. However, in a place like Hamilton, where our LRT project has been recommitted to again with funding from the federal Liberals and the provincial Conservatives, that was money that was only for the LRT. So it's like getting a gift card instead of getting cash. You've got to spend it on one thing. And some of council didn't like that. They were quite opposed to that, but eventually it was decided that they would go forward with the project. So advocates could point to that and say, this is an example where the federal government had a strong idea of what they wanted. They wanted something downtown. They thought it would help a lot of people, and they decided we're just going to sort of make it more certain that that happens by making this less of an option about what you're going to put that money towards.
And we should mention for that specific project, the funding was 50-50, $1.7 billion from the provincial government, 1.7 from the feds, for a total of 3.4. I want to talk about transit in terms of improving a city's livability. Can you give us some examples of that?
Well, I think one example with that idea of transit-oriented communities could just be the amount of people who rely on transit just to get groceries. So if I think about my street, for example, in Hamilton, the bus comes maybe every 30 minutes. It's probably a 20-minute walk to the grocery store. And by vehicle, you could get there in 5 to 10 minutes. So if you're someone who's got a vehicle, it's a lot easier to get to the grocery store, get what you need, and get back. And maybe you could do that in the amount of time that someone is still waiting for their first bus to come. So it's really, when you talk about transit and you talk about getting people and moving them faster, sometimes it's gained time. But I also heard from advocates like Matthew Palm, like researchers like Matthew Palm, that it could even be the difference between someone, let's say, missing an important medical appointment. Maybe you've got to go talk to your doctor and the bus is delayed 45 minutes and you can't get there. So there's really big impacts when you think about just all the necessary things that people rely on these systems for.
And I think it's quite interesting with the numbers that you shared off the top. When we look at Hamilton's ridership, for example, even though it dipped to, about 50%, those were people who, relied on transit. It didn't matter if it was a pandemic or not. This was what it was. I'm curious. Obviously, we're in the election. I want to know. You spoke to people from the 4 major parties. What are we hearing on the transit front when we talk about sort of long-term projects in terms of improving transit?
Right. I sent out a question asking if they believed that transit was an important part of recovery, and if so, how they would address that. So I can go through some of those responses. So the Green Party of Canada, they said that they would invest in transit services and infrastructure, electrify buses, and improve transit in between cities. They also said that they would not want to be providing funding to any cities for rapid transit unless those cities were locating housing along those lines. I did not get a response from the NDP campaign, but their platform promises to expand transit between communities as well, prioritizing low-cost, low-carbon projects with the goal of electrifying municipal transit by 2030. They also say that they would help provinces and municipalities get to fare-free transit if that was something that they were interested in. So the Conservative Party did not directly answer my question, but they also have some transit in their platform. One of the things that they want to do is require any municipalities receiving federal transit funding to increase density near that funded transit. And the Liberal Party, the statement that they sent said a lot about the recent transit investments that they've been making in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. They said that if elected, they would continue those. They also pointed to a transit fund that's slated to begin in 2026 for permanent funding. And they say that they would support rural transit, zero-emission buses, and intercity transit.
A lot of stuff on their platforms for sure, something that we will keep an eye out. I want to thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you very much.
The agenda went flat out on the election this week, examining the party's platforms on childcare, housing, climate, Indigenous issues, and the opioid crisis. The agenda's weekend review highlights just some of that. Have a look.
Armin, you've heard the suggestion from Andrea that while you prefer a proposal that creates new spaces and allows parents a more affordable option than currently exists, if they want that option, your plan doesn't take into account, or the plan you endorse doesn't take into account, the other options. For example, stay-at-home parents who would like to take care of their child at home and still recognize some kind of tax advantage for doing so. Could you speak to that?
We do have tax advantages for parents that choose to stay at home. We do also have the Canada Child Benefit, which has been doubled by every single Conservative or Liberal government that has come into power at the federal level since 1993. We've poured billions upon billions of dollars to support families to stay at home and take care of their kids. But somewhere around the 80s, young families with kids went from 35% with only one parent working to over three quarters. So from just a bit over a third of both parents working in families raising kids to three quarters of both parents working. We need more help. We have not created spaces. It is incorrect to say that the existing plan that has been signed by 7 provinces and 1 territory and was being negotiated by Ontario as well, which would have stood to receive $11 billion. It is unfair to say and incorrect to say that it would ignore what exists. It keeps in place what exists. It simply says we need to add capacity. And when we add capacity using the taxpayer's dollar, we don't do it by not planning the quality and quantity and location of care we need. So it requires planning, just like building a hospital, just like building a school. We need to plan spaces, or there is no bona fide choice for parents, particularly low-income parents who face the biggest childcare deserts and have to scramble. We've been scrambling for 50 years as parents of children. It's time to stop scrambling and start maximizing the potential of both parents and children by providing good quality care. To say that it's unlicensed and unregulated and that makes it great, that's nonsense. You wouldn't do that for your high school student. You wouldn't think that unregulated teachers for your high school student would be accessible, that your frail grandmother being in a long-term care facility should have no standards of care, no enforceable regulations on how that care is provided, and we certainly wouldn't do it in hospitals. When we talk about the care economy, we need to set standards in place. There will be always people that operate outside of that. Nobody's taking care away from them, but when you present parents with the choice of having high quality, affordable, licensed care, that's what they will run, not walk to.
Okay, Andrew, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, parents need to choose the quality. The parents are the ones who choose the quality. And I say that I stand in favor of all the different options that parents are using. Could be licensed centers, could be unlicensed care in homes, could be a variety of other care forms. I happen to be the mom of a 2-year-old right now, using a myriad of different forms all at the same time and weaving together a really rich tapestry of care that I have decided for our family is the best quality that we can possibly get. It is patronizing, frankly, to suggest that families who are doing that are not able to discern what is quality. And something I've said before, and I'll say here now, is that regardless of who's providing the care, if it's a public licensed center, parents need to be going in there. There need to be markers of what's quality, and that needs to be easily discernible to parents at all points in time. The childcare deserts only come up when you're only measuring licensed care. So again, that's a frustration because for example, Brampton is apparently a desert, but Oakville is an oasis. So you've got wealthy Oakville, where apparently they wanted that type of care and they built it. And Brampton has other forms of care. There's a high portion of South Asians and immigrants from different communities who have different values around childcare. These values need to be recognized and they need to be accepted and not judged as being inferior in favor of another system that, as I've mentioned already, is unlikely to deliver the spaces even for those parents who really want to use them.
I'm sure you've looked at the party platforms in more depth than the simple bullet points that we put up there for simplicity's sake. So by that account, what do you think is missing from the party platforms that you wish had been in there?
Detail. Look, you use this expression yourself, Steve. You campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. The realtors are thrilled that at least these highlights are part of the platform. After the election campaign, then we go to work to twist arms and make sure they carry through in those details. To my colleagues' comments, I think we all agree that supply is the issue. More inventory, more choice across the spectrum. It's a first-time home, middle-class homes, rentals, and social housing as well for the most vulnerable. No doubt about it. Pleased to see aspects of that in all the programs. I get what they're saying around demand side. Totally get that. But here's the issue. Right now, the system is working for those that are connected. If you are rich, your mom and dad have an enormous bank where they can lend you money, the system works okay. But if you're a new Canadian, you're an entrepreneur, you're somebody trying to get into the middle class and own a home, that great Canadian dream, you're kind of shut out. So we're happy to see in the Conservative and New Democrat platforms, and some degree in the Liberal platforms, assistance for those who don't have the access to the big money. The principle, they're making sure that they are appropriately cautious, but modernizing the stress test, for example, not making people renew their mortgage if they've already go to another stress test when they've renewed their mortgage. These are sensible policies that will keep the principle of being thoughtful and long-term investment, but open up opportunities wherever you are in the financial spectrum.
Sabrina, what's not here that should be?
I'm more concerned about what is there. Unlike Tim, I'm more concerned about stoking demand. And the issue for young Canadians, ones who don't have family money or who may be low income, isn't that they can't access more credit and more debt. It's that home prices are too high. So putting in programs that are going to make those prices higher and allow young people and first-time home buyers to take on more debt isn't helpful. Our housing debt is already at $2 trillion nationally. And according to international organizations, when household debt goes over 80% of a country's GDP, you're in a danger zone. Canada's is at over 112% right now. So anything that increases the ability to take on more debt for longer is not a solution.
John, what's missing?
Yeah, I think the one big thing that I would have liked to have seen is, when we're at effectively a crossroads in our housing market in Canada where it's unbelievably unaffordable. And I really think policymakers should have focused on policies that effectively make it harder for investors to be buying single family homes. At the end of the day in Canada, 1 in 5 homes are bought by investors. In the GTA, it's nearly 1 in 4 homes that are bought by investors. And again, to Tim's point, investors are the people who are benefiting. They're the ones that probably have their own homes, have multiple properties, and if our policymakers wants to help people get on the ladder, I agree with Tim. It's hard for people who don't have parents cutting them big checks. But when you relax the stress test, when you relax these policies for all, you're not just helping people who don't have that equity from their family, you're helping everybody. So if they wanted to target one group, helping first generation home buyers would have been smarter than relaxing credit and allowing all buyers to take on more debt.
Well, I keep hearing this recurring issue of encouraging demand. And Tim, maybe I can get you to draw upon your political experience with this. If too many of these policy planks are encouraging even more demand in what is already a white-hot real estate market, why are they doing it?
It is a huge political issue. The Canadian dream has been to own a home. That's what my grandparents did when they came here from then Czechoslovakia. They bought a home. They rented out part of it. They worked hard, saved every buck. They wanted some security and some stability. That remains a part of what many people want to do. So, Steve, we've done a lot of research through the Ontario Real Estate Association. Folks watching the agenda can go to aria.com to see it. But you will see not only for millennials and the parents who love them dearly, but want to see them get a place of their own and get out of the house. This is a driver of an issue. So if the sweet spot to win this election is going to be the greater Toronto, Hamilton area and the lower mainland of Vancouver, then you cannot blame the parties for trying to tap into that vote. But it's also a theme that's very important, and that is helping create that next generation who can get the keys to the home and say, I got a place to call home.
Sabrina, Tim just in fact, echoed what everybody assumes to be true, which is that everybody wants to be a homeowner someday. It is a great Canadian dream. I gather you're a tenant, though. Is that right? You rent?
Yes, I'm a renter.
So does that speak for you? Do you want to be a homeowner someday?
It does. I'd love to be. I'm a typical millennial where I was raised with the dream of homeownership, and I was raised with the idea that if you work hard and you secure a certain type of job, you should be able to afford a home. And you can't these days. And quite frankly, it's a struggle to afford rent in Toronto because we've allowed our housing crisis to get to a point where it's not just an ownership crisis, it's also a rental crisis. And young people are spending ever increasing amounts of their paycheck on housing. And the problem with that is it doesn't just affect young people, it affects the entire economy because we're diverting investment from other more productive areas, especially coming out of COVID. We should be out spending our money at small businesses, at restaurants. Instead, all that is just going to our landlords' bank accounts or to the banks if we do have a mortgage. And that's why it's important that we just don't allow access to more debt.
Lorraine, why do you think the Greens have the best platform on offer?
The Green platform is the policy is based on a lot of work that Canada has already done to move us forward. And I think the Greens are more bold and progressive in saying things like it's time to work, on a basis of free, prior, and informed consent with First Nations to repeal the Indian Act and get out from under that oppressive, sexist, racist policy.
Cynthia, let me get you to speak to one of the criticisms we hear about both the leader of your party and about the party itself, and that is lots of talk, not necessarily lots of action. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's not something that I would absolutely not agree with. I think that the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau has made some huge strides forward. This is a government that has said yes. This is the first government that, in my recollection, and I'm well over 60 now, that has said yes, that has taken a whole of government approach, that has put in every single mandate letter of every single ministry that they must deal with these issues. They're about 86% addressing the 94 calls to action. They're either done or they're in progress. They've got the water boil advisories lifted. They've got something like 68% of them. So they're actually making, and that's in 6 years. So they're actually doing what they said. They did the missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry. They have the 236 recommendations that are moving forward, and they put resources into that. They have done an incredible amount of work. I think the problem is, and I say this all the time, is we don't get it into the public domain very quickly. And I know that a lot of the negotiations that are going on across the table where jurisdiction and authority is being addressed are not in the public domain until they're resolved. So you don't put negotiations as they're moving forward out there. So I think a lot of people don't realize that the Minister of Crown Relations has done an incredible job of actually lifting a lot of those conversations. Child welfare is being addressed, the standards being accommodated, the way it's funded being changed. So there's a lot going on that I guess just doesn't get really out there. And I think it's been one of my sort of over the side complaints about it all is like, you're doing all this great work. Why don't you let people know about it so that they can understand that we are actually moving forward very quickly? So all of those things, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that got royal assent under this government. There's a lot going on, I think, that we need to be proud of. And reconciliation, that's my gig. I mean, I'm the chair for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba. I'm pushing this all the time. I know what's going on. We have our thumb on the pulse, whether it's about putting resources into the unmarked graves and ensuring that those communities are doing the work, not outside people. We're ensuring that the communities themselves are lifted in governance, in child welfare, and in every other place that I can actually honestly think about. So yeah, I think Justin Trudeau's done a great job of it, and I think he needs to continue to do his work. And I think we all need to be in there actually ensuring that we're sort of pushing him along and ensuring that our voices are a part of that conversation.
Jason, the Liberals think they've got a good story to tell as it relates to Indigenous issues. What's the good story the NDP thinks it has to tell on this?
Well, I'm an Indigenous leader, and I've worked with the current government, and I would, beg to differ a bit, but that's not the time for it, I don't think, right now. The focus of the NDP, I know you mentioned earlier on that we were the only party to speak about genocide, and I know we have a good understanding of that. But you also mentioned that we don't talk about sovereignty. But what we do talk about is enacting true nation-to-nation relationships. And the approach from the NDP is not the paternalistic top-down approach that Indigenous people are so accustomed to. I know the system's not working, and if it was working, I wouldn't be here. I would be at home still, fulfilling my duties as chief. But it's not working for us, and I know that. From the other end of it, not from the top-down approach, but from the other end of it, on the communities, we're not getting the response. And the BWAs, they have been lifted and then reinstated, days later. So that's a struggle. I worked across the country, training Indigenous people to run water and wastewater facilities. This isn't a turnkey solution, and it takes real investment. And we have to stop fighting ourselves. We have to stop fighting Indigenous children, stop spending money fighting our people.
We could drown in numbers here, so I'm going to try not to do that. But all four major parties are promising to cut emissions by certain percentages below the 2005 levels by the year 2030, but to varying degrees. And I'll ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, just to put these numbers up here, and then we'll dive in. This is the plan to cut emissions by the year 2030. The Liberals say they can do 40%, the Conservatives 30%, the Greens 60%, the NDP 50%. So let's go around on this one. Adam, to you first. How realistically achievable do you think these four numbers are?
I think they're all a stretch for different reasons. I mean, I think Canada may be reasonably on pace to get to where the 30% that was government policy until quite recently. The 40% the Liberals are pledging to up it to may be a bit of a stretch and with current policies. I think the Conservatives would have a little bit of a hard time reaching the 30%, which they have committed to, despite government policy maybe getting us there, largely because, and I think we'll probably talk more about this, but largely because they're planning to dramatically downscale the carbon price, among other things. So those are challenging. And then the other parties, look, I don't think it would take an awful lot to get to 50 or 60%. I think it's good, though, that parties on the left, and in the Greens case, that frankly is not close to government, are maybe willing to push a little harder to try and raise the level of ambition.
Mark, based on what you have seen in the party platforms, and now you see the numbers that are the targets, how much of that's achievable?
Well, I mean, so I look at it from someone who models the energy economy system. All of them are achievable. Even 100% by next year is achievable. So what I'm interested in, though, because we have this long history of, I call it climate insincerity, where governments or politicians put out targets, and then when they get in power, sometimes they're even paralyzed by the target because they realize, oh, we're actually going to have to disrupt people's lives, make some things more expensive, and it's not easy. We're going to have regulations and carbon pricing. And so, yes, obviously a smaller target is more achievable than a bigger target, but I do agree with Adam that the 30 and 40% will involve major challenges in a 9 or 10 year period. I mean, you're talking about the cars you're looking at driving around on the road changing dramatically over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and try to figure out how that happens, how houses are heated, the industry. So it's a huge challenge.
You do have what you call a sincerity index, and we will get to that later in our conversation because you've got some fascinating numbers on that. Charles, how about to you on this issue? Who has a platform that you believe can actually achieve the numbers enunciated here?
Well, I guess as Mark mentioned, I would agree with that. It's going to be challenging to achieve those numbers. And as he said, it's really about the cost and what are the consequences, what actually has to happen in the real world here. I would say that, we don't have some of the easy wins that perhaps the US does, for example, in terms of our electrical sector to decarbonize. So there's no obvious winners here, I don't think.
Sarah, how about to you on this?
I think whose plan is the most realistic depends on what you decide you care about the most. So let's presume that we care about the economy and jobs. I largely agree with what Charles and Mark have said. I think maintaining some level of economic health and jobs throughout the clean energy transition is an important one and should be Canada's #1 goal. You have challenges with what the NDP and the Greens have put forward in terms of how fast you have to ratchet up policy and what that does to the economy to achieve the targets. We know from Mark's work and from others' work that the Liberal plan is probably going to get us to 40%. We're not 100% sure, but we know that at least the 36% that they previously committed to when they released their last climate plan in the spring, said that it was reasonable. They had modeling, and now 40% seems relatively doable. With the conservative target, I do take issue with it. I wonder if the Conservatives, if they were to achieve power, could show up in Glasgow for the next Council of All Parties meeting with a reduced target, given that everybody, the rest of Canada's business partners, have said, what we want is increased ambition, increased targets. Could Canada credibly show up and say, hey, we're backing out of the business deal? I'm not sure about that.
So when you say show up in Glasgow, you mean the meeting in November in Scotland that the world is going to attend dealing with climate change? You think they'd have a pretty tough time showing up to that saying, we're for 30%?
Yeah, I think so.
I got that. Okay. I want to take just a moment now to briefly outline some of what the parties have on offer. So Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up here. Starting with the Liberals, the Liberals would propose to invest $25 million for public education to reduce the stigma associated with problematic substance use. They've got $500 million in their plan for a full range of evidence-based treatment, and they'd like to reform the criminal code to repeal relevant mandatory minimum penalties. The Conservatives, the second-place party in the last Parliament, would invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds. Law enforcement should focus on dealers and traffickers, say the Conservatives, and all policies have the reduction of harm and promotion of recovery as their objectives. The NDP would immediately declare the overdose crisis a national public health emergency. They would purport to create a safe supply of medically regulated alternatives to toxic street drugs and end the criminalization and stigma of drug addiction. And the Greens declare that the drug poisoning crisis is a national public health emergency. They would create a national safe supply of drugs of choice and decriminalize the possession of illicit drugs for personal use. Let's, you know what, I think maybe the best thing to do here is just, with all of that having been said, let me get, Kwam, to you first, your expertise on what stands out for you there as being particularly useful or relevant given the challenges afoot.
I'll just give you a bit of context in how I'm thinking. So one of the things that has happened during the pandemic is that we've had a significant change in who is actually dying from opioids. And we've got more people who are not in contact with services or who would probably never have been in contact with services, and more accidental deaths because of a toxic supply of fentanyl. So we've seen the supply of opioids change to make them more dangerous. The reason I say that is because if we're thinking about saving lives, just increasing treatment will not do the trick. Because a lot of the people who are dying are not people who would be in contact with services or who believe they need services. And a lot of people are dying because of accidents, because now the supply of a particular opioid, fentanyl, is so toxic that very small amounts will kill people. So if we want to deal with that, we have to do something about toxic supply and safe supply, as well as doing something about treatment, which means that we need to really, really change up what we're doing. So when I see, and I think the platforms seem to bifurcate. On the one hand, we've got the NDP and the Greens saying we need to fundamentally change things. And then on the other side, we have the Conservatives and the Liberals that seem to be saying in their platforms, we need more of the same. And my view from the research and from all of the policy work that I've seen is more of the same, more treatment, and all of the other things. That's good, but it won't actually solve the problem. You need something much more fundamental if you want to really save people's lives.
Okay, Hassan, again, I'm not asking you to endorse anybody's platform in particular, but what stands out as being particularly useful here?
Yeah, I think what really stands out to me is what seems like an artificial distinction between treatment and harm reduction. When I think about almost everything I do in medicine, it's all harm reduction. When I treat someone's diabetes, I'm not curing their diabetes. I'm reducing the harms of high blood sugar. But when it comes to people who use drugs, we seem to have made these artificial distinctions where you're either for, safe supply and decriminalization, or you're for kind of recovery and abstinence-based treatment. And I think that's really dangerous. And I'll give you an example of why. For some of my patients, they live in sober housing where, they can't use substances or they lose their housing. We have a housing crisis where if they do relapse, they have nowhere to go. And so they have to choose between keeping their housing or using in the bathroom of a fast food restaurant alone when they're at highest risk. And we make people make these impossible choices, as opposed to providing a large spectrum of options, reducing the barriers between them, and letting people, get the treatment they need when they need it and where they need it. And that's not the fundamental shift that I'm seeing in these platforms.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And for all our election coverage in one place, you can check out tvo.org/federal election 2021. And that's it for this Friday, September 17th, 2021. Monday, we'll find out why labor shortages persist even as the economy is mostly reopened. Also, some cause for cautious optimism from climate science. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thank you for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, and Steve will see you on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman.